And we're live. And good morning or good evening wherever you are in the world. It's morning if it's in Asia and Australia. It's evening if you're in North America and South America and Central America and that side of the world. And my name is Regina Yao, and I am the founder and president of the Pixel Project. And I am hosting our sixth Read for Pixels Google Hangout today. And Read for Pixels is a campaign whereby the Pixel Project, an anti-violence against women nonprofit, collaborates with 11 award-winning best-selling authors, including today's guest. And today's guest is Chuck Wendig. Hi, Chuck.
Hello. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. And today, and what we're gonna do now is Chuck is gonna read from his latest Blackbirds book, and that's exciting because it's just come out. Yes, Chuck. Hang on, Chuck. Let me click back to you. Show the cover again. Yes, awesome. That looks really cool. Yay!
It is cool, maybe.
Yeah.
Cool cover.
And Chuck's gonna read a little bit, and then we'll go off into hopefully what will turn into one of Chuck's most famous rants. Yes, Chuck.
I'll be more polite here than I am on my blog. I promise. I'll dial it back. We're not going up to 11 on this one.
Yeah, and we'll talk about women in pop culture. Yes, Chuck. We'll talk about women in Chuck's books. We'll talk about women's rights and stopping violence against women. And if you want to know a bit more about Read for Pixels, go to is.gd/Read for Pixels 2014. So capital letter R, the number 4, capital letter P, and then 2014. And Chuck and I will talk a little bit more about the fundraising that we're doing towards the end of the session. But for now, let's go back to Chuck, and Chuck will start his reading. Yay!
Okay. Hi. All right, I'm going to read a short little passage, chapter 3 from Blackbirds, which is book 2 of my Heartland trilogy, young adult trilogy. In this trilogy, the world has been taken over by literally bloodthirsty corn, bioengineered by the Empyrean elite, who float in the skies in their big, rich flotilla cities, while the Heartlanders toil in the dirt and dust below, managing the corn. And so a gaggle of the standard cantankerous teenagers get into trouble while going against those Empyrean elite. So I'll spoil a little piece of the first book in a character named Gwendolyn Shawcatch. Gwenny, her family wins something called the lottery. And by winning the lottery, it's expected that you get to go leave the Heartland and go live on one of the Empyrean flotillas. So at the beginning of Blackbirds, we discover that winning the lottery does indeed earn her a trip to the flotilla, but it also earns her a kind of indentured servitude, and chapter 3 is where we discover what she is doing. So chapter 3 is called The Pegasus Girl. In a room full of mutants, Gwenny still feels like a freak. Her shovel scrapes the bottom of the stall, scooping up bedding made from dried corn husks and corn leaves, bedding that is also soaked through with the waste of the stall's inhabitant, an inhabitant that now stands in the next stall over, probably soiling that one while she cleans this one. The horse, or rather the horse, shoves its head over the stall wall. It whinnies and snorts, nostrils flaring, expelling a fine mist of snot. Gwenny scowls, wipes her cheek with the back of her hand. She looks at the animal, this one pinker than the skin of a baby's bottom, pink as the frosting atop a cake made by an Empyrean baker. She shoots out her tongue, blowing a raspberry that gives the creature a taste of its own medicine. Her own spit flecks the animal's nose. The horse blinks, irritated. She calls this one Pinky. She props up the shovel, her muscles aching. The sour smell of the soiled stalls has crawled up inside her nose like a cob snake coiled around a cornstalk, and it just won't leave. "What are you looking at?" she asks Pinky. The horse's gums peel back, showing off yellow teeth. Whenever the horse moves, she hears a clicking, a scraping, and though the lights here in the stable are dim, she can see the shadows rising and falling on the animal's back. Shadows like black fingers, Shadows that are in fact long, long bones, jointed and bent like parts of a busted umbrella. Bones that rise off the shoulders and curl to the ground. They were supposed to be wings. But they didn't come out right, according to Ballastair Harrington, her keeper and their designer. They came out featherless. Skinless, too, just bones. Bones that jut out of a horse's flesh, painful at the source. That's another of Gwenny's many jobs. Apply a salve to the juncture of bone and body. A job that Pinky finds none too pleasing, and just yesterday he stomped down on Gwenny's foot with a heavy, cracked hoof. Nothing broken, but she still feels it. Pinky is not the only inhabitant of this stable of freaks. Across the way is Blackjack, a black horse with black wings, wings that are neither swan-like nor elegant, but rather bat-like and diseased. They twitch and tighten even in the creature's sleep. Blackie's a real unpleasant beast. He bites, thrashes, has milky eyes that look right through her. In a farther stall is Goose Down, a horse with no wings and no fur at all, but rather an entire body covered in dirty white feathers. And then Stubby, 4 too short legs and a set of stubby nodules protruding over the animal's shoulders, as if the creature once had wings but someone clipped them off. None of these are their official names. They're just the names Gwenny's given them. Better than calling them Subject 312 or Subject 409. These animals are the lucky ones. Many others were born with deformities far too severe, horses without skin, without legs, blind, deaf, hearts outside their bodies. One of them finally born with a beautiful chestnut coat and wings like feathers from the softest pillow. And then when they asked it to fly, they shoved it over the edge, for it's not a horse's inclination to leap into the void, and the wings unfurled and tried to catch air. The horse pitched forward, heavy in the front, and dropped like a brick through the air. Sure to die a horrible death upon striking the ground somewhere far below their feet. Probably, she thinks just now, crushing some poor Heartlander's house. Flying horses, a Pegasus. The Empyrean wants a Pegasus, like the one on their official sigil. Something to represent them, some iconic ideal of, what was it that Harrington had said? The iconic ideal of man's dominance over nature, in proof that he deserves to sit at the manor table with the Lord and the Lady themselves. He didn't seem convinced by that line of nonsense, and neither was she. Not that she had much room to argue anyway, what with her being the stall-mucker of mutant Pegasuses. The life of a lottery winner laid bare. She scoops another load of soggy corn piss mush into the small wagon, and the horse apples, or as she likes to call them, Pegasus pears, thud bump against the metal bottom. Then she pulls the wagon to the far end of the room past the other stalls. Blackjack stomps his hooves, gives her a demonic look. She grabs the handle to the hatch and lifts. The wind fills the room, rustles her hair, and the volume of the flotilla's engines and hover panels become more than just a droning thrum. It fills the space an ear-ringing roar that upsets all the horses. She stops for a moment, gazing down, 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 there below, the endless corn of the heartland, carved into squares and lined by the various motivators like tillers, threshers, seeders, sprayers, all of which look like her little brother Scooter's toys from way up here. Scooter, the heartland, Kale, Boylan. Her heart hurts. She blinks back tears. Gwenny bites the inside of her cheek, tastes blood, and feels that little jolt of pain that spins the thread of her grief into a tattered rag of rage. I hate this place. I hate these people. I want to go home. Eyes winced, she upends the wagon. Corn husks and Pegasus waste go out through the hole, and they fall, breaking apart in midair, bits turning to specks, turning to nothing. She thinks we always used to wonder exactly why shit was falling on our heads, and not exactly metaphorically either. Just then the door to the stable flings open. Young Ballastair Harrington, the man behind the genetic half of the Pegasus project, hurries into the room, leading as he always does with his head and his shoulders. Gwenny thinks he looks as if he's in a perpetual state of almost falling forward, his legs the eager and only saviors that stop him from landing on his face. He's a few years older than she is, different from the Heartlander she knows. They are rugged, dirty, broad-shouldered. He's thin and bony like an articulated wooden doll. Handsome, though, in his own peculiar way. He is not dressed in his usual white coat. His hair is not in its typical disarray. The blonde wisps atop his head have been tamed and forced to lie down. His white coat has been replaced with a pinstriped mandarin collar suit, the stripes themselves a liquid gold that bubbles and climbs from hem to shoulders. An effect that is, in its own way, quite hypnotizing. A cavilling grackle with a small jeweled collar hops about on his shoulder, its little wings fluttering. The bird is Erasmus, forever on Ballastair's shoulder, though Gwenny's never seen the jeweled collar on the bird before, or the pinstripe suit coat on him. "Why are you?" she starts to ask, but he interrupts her. "We're late," he barks, a sentiment of panic, not anger. Late, Erasmus chirps. The small, bruise-colored bird shakes its wings and dances side to side. Late for what? She asks. Late, he hisses through clenched teeth. For the party. And that's the end of the book. Not really the end of the book. End of the chapter, though. So that's where.
Hopefully there will be. Is that an ebook, Chuck? Because I would love to buy and download that.
It is. It's on the Amazons.
Oh, okay. The Amazon is not available where I am, so. Ew. Okay.
Yes. Sorry.
Well,
goes the e-publishing route.
Yeah. Hopefully, we'll be able to get it all over the world because I really want to know what happens.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So let's get started with the Q&A session. With our little, what did I call it just now? Rant session. Yes. And everybody who's watching this, we see you. There's more than 20 of you, and yes, please start sending in your questions, and we'll answer them, in between our rants. All right. So, okay. So, Chuck, your female protagonists, such as Gwenny and Miriam Black, they are amazingly vivid and human. And so, as a storyteller and a male author, I'm sorry to gender this, but okay. So, as a storyteller and a male author, what is your definition of in open and close inverted commas, strong female character?
There it is, that phrase.
Yes.
Well, first of all, I'm not obviously super big fan of the word strong because it connotes maybe the wrong thing. I think people think strong and they think someone who can kick butt. I think the characters in general are best when they're complex and treated like real people, and that's true whether you're talking literally any character you write should be given a level of complexity and depth, and that includes women, surprise, surprise, because they're people deserving of complexity and depth that the author gives them. And I think it's also worth noting that you don't want to limit the character by her being a woman. In other words, unless it's appropriate to the story world, in other words, she faces in the story world issues that women face, right? But if the author approaches it as she's weak because she's a woman, as opposed to she's weak because the world treats women poorly, those are two very different things, and I think it's important for the author to be aware of those distinctions. Yeah,
so do you have any advice for authors who are looking to create, what you call complex, very human characters like Miriam, like Gwenny? Because it like we were chatting before we went on air, it's quite hard to do that, especially when you have stereotypes and cultural stereotypes and everything bumping around you and you're soaking in a stew, right? So how do you do that?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's important to be aware of those things outside of your own work in general, just to be aware of the stereotypes, be aware of the traps that people fall into. And part of that comes in being diligent, with looking for it, but also means reading widely, reading more diversely, trying to write more diversely. And then when you bring those things to the page, is trying to be aware of when you're bringing those preconceived notions, whether it's something that you have yourself or whether it's something that society expects or whatever it is, you want to be aware of those things. And address them or cut them out. And, sometimes that means, looking back over a draft. I mean, certainly I'm not a perfect, quote-unquote, ally as it is. I know I get things wrong sometimes, and I think it's important to be aware that you will get things wrong, and to be aware that, you're trying to strive for that level of complexity and depth, and that, treat them like people. Just like treat every character like they're a person, and not treat them like they're a woman before they're a person. And, specifically defined by that trait, that trope.
Yeah, that strong trope, because I think that strong trope has been around since Joss Whedon created Buffy. And the irony is Joss Whedon created Buffy, right, by turning tropes on their head. The little blonde girl who usually gets offed first ends up being, the vampire slayer. But we still have a long way to go, I think.
Yeah. I think Buffy is great because she's a strong character in that she's literally she's got strong character. She's got a lot going on, You know, there's a lot of things that make her more complex and compelling as a person as she goes through high school and as she changes and grows. So I think there are things, and Willow particularly also is very, you know, I think people think Buffy's the strong female character because she kicks a lot of butt, but it's like Willow is equally complex. Anya, they have such great things that contribute to the narrative, and they're like people you know, and they're, you know, they have frailties and they have strengths, and they're heroes, but they're not perfect heroes. And they give the, you know, all the great traits that you would give to any character they possess.
Yeah, you know, like with Willow's story arc, it's sort of like it goes into Dark Willow, and then you know, it shows the consequences of addiction and all that. And I thought that's not particularly male or female. Anyone could actually go to that, you know, to that sort of dark side allegory. Oh, there is a question here that feeds into what we're discussing. Yes, by Caleb Russell. Hang on, let me select the question. Okay, Caleb says, what was your inspiration for Miriam Black? She is one of my favorite characters in all genre fiction.
Ooh, well that just warms the dead little bird's nest I call a heart. The inspiration for Miriam is, you know, I sort of hit that point in my life when I realized people died. People die. Like, you know, as a teenager, you kind of are peripherally aware of it. Death is sort of a romantic thing when you're a teenager. And then as you start to kind of grow up and people actually start to die, and you start to recognize not only their mortality but your own. Miriam is sort of born out of that, and that she's a power fantasy, and that she can see how people are going to die, but it's also a diseased power fantasy, because I like to limit characters and I like to give them conflict, and I like to punish the character sometimes, because I think that makes it, you know, interesting, something to overcome, and something that challenges them and makes them who they are. And so it couldn't just be that she sees that and has that power. It's that, you know, it's the thing that makes her who she is now, and it's the thing that's really challenged her and tested her along the way. So it's not a power fantasy that's pure. It's not easy. She has to basically move mountains to accomplish what she wants to accomplish in the first book.
All right, so that's done. The questions are piling in, Chuck.
Oh, good. Bring them on.
Yeah, so we'll just intersperse the questions with, you know, our discussion. And so going back to, you know, talking about stereotypes and tropes, you had written a blog post about, you know, rape, the use of rape as a trope in fiction, and you're using Game of Thrones as an anchor for your discussion. And prior to, you know, while we were waiting to go on air just now, you know, we were talking about the differences between how it's used in Game of Thrones and how it's used in Outlander, where it feels more organic to the plot and it doesn't feel more gratuitous. So, you know, hold forth, Chuck. Go and tell us.
Just hold forth. I will hold court on this matter, and all will be decided.
Yes.
You know, I haven't seen Outlander, but we talked about it a little bit. I think what, for me, sort of signifies, I mean, obviously no one would say that rape is not a topic you should bring to fiction. Obviously it's a thing that happens, and it's a terrible thing that happens, and it needs to be addressed. That's what fiction is really good at doing. Fiction is sort of telling truth through lies. It lies a lot, but says a lot of true things. The trick is with when you approach rape in fiction, it can't just be a cheap plot point. It can't be a trope. It can't be a crutch. It can't be a thing that makes the man move to action and be sad and be vengeful. It's not some lazy motivator or mechanism, and sometimes it's treated like that. Sometimes it's treated like, oh, what I need here is something to motivate the hero to action, or something that progresses the plot, or something that shows just how bad the villain is. And it's not, and it's just as we were saying, how, you know, women as characters need to be treated like human beings with all of the things that come with human beings. Rape needs to come with all of that weight on it. It needs to come with all of that complexity and terror and all of the issues that come with rape. It can't just be this, like, thing that happens, like something that just happens to women in fiction sometimes. Oh, whoops, oh well. And sometimes, you know, with Game of Thrones, it continues that so often and so reiteratively that it becomes not only a crutch and not only a motivator, but sometimes it seems lazy, like it's just a thing that fills in how dark the world is. Like, well, the world is so dark because rape, rape, and rape, and rape. And then it also feels occasionally like it's tempting to be somewhat titillating. And then there's, you know, the question of like, well, was that even rape? And if you're putting rape in the fiction and it's not, if it's something that inspires those kind of discussions and not the discussions that are healthy about what that means for the world or for our world, but something that causes a certain part of your audience to rise to defend it, then you might be in some squickier territory there.
Oh yeah, because you know, yesterday I just having a Facebook conversation with a friend, and she was ranting about, well, not really ranting, but she was like, "What the f?" And she was reading this book, and it's, you know, it's not just, you know, she basically goes, you know, she's reading this book, and you know, the author in the book shall remain unnamed because we do not sully anyone's name here. And she basically said that it's a literary book, so it's one of those books that kind of meanders along with the character, and then suddenly the main character, whom she really liked, suddenly he raped someone, and she was like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you know, it's kind of, I guess it kind of feeds into what you were saying about you know, not just trotting out rape as a trope when you're writing stuff, but you know, how do you do that? I mean, when I interviewed Robert J. Sawyer, when we were chatting about this, because he did. He has a book of hominids, and the main character, Mary Wan, she was raped, and then she survived the rape, and he made her very human, very relatable. And he said that it took a lot of conversation with rape survivors, reading a lot of memoirs, talking to a lot of experts before he even attempted to write this. And marry, and you know, and create Mary Wan. God, sorry, my pronunciation. Anyway, so yeah, so what you know, that's his piece of advice. You know, research, talk to people, make sure that you get it right. So what would your advice be to people who are thinking that this might be an rape or sexual assault, might be an organic plot point, but they're not quite sure? What would your advice be?
I would say to stop and think very hard about it. It's a very common trope in fiction, and it is way overused. And it's so overused that it becomes lazy, which is obviously not the fault of every individual writer, but it is certainly sort of a cultural thing that's happened. It's sort of, that's the momentum that's there. And you sort of have to acknowledge it whether or not you're a part of it or not. And so the question is, do you really, really, really have to go that way? Is that really something that you feel is vital to the story? Not just rape as like a secondary component, but a story that actually is in some way about that. And that's vital, and about the character, and about the survival, and about the act. And, you know, that's when you can start having that conversation and having that kind of research that Robert is talking about in terms of research and making sure it's authentic to the character and the experience.
Okay. Oh, we have a question here that relates to what we're discussing. Hang on.
I'm listening.
Okay, it's from Tessa Cavagnero. I'm sorry, Tessa. Tessa, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but anyway, Tessa says, how does this discussion of rape relate to the questionable sexual assault scene in Blackbirds? That was the only part of the book that really threw me for a loop. Miriam's throwaway "can't rape," in inverted commas, "can't rape the willing," made it seem like a gray area.
Yes. First of all, it's worth noting that I wrote that book some years ago. I didn't write that while I've only been publishing novels for about the last 3 years. Blackbirds took me about 5 years to write. And all of this stuff that we're talking about was not necessarily stuff I thought about. So, you know, it's something that I would deal with a little more head-on if I were rewriting that book. Miriam is a troubled character, and she, you know, sometimes I don't think people necessarily like what she says, and they think that it's either me saying them or it's she's saying truth. That's not really the case with Miriam. Miriam says a lot of horrible things because she's ultimately kind of a damaged person, and books are a lot about her trying to put those pieces back together. So definitely it's kind of emblematic of that, but I think it's maybe handled a little too muddily for my taste. as I said, not being an ally doesn't mean being a perfect one. So it's about learning and trying to see what that means going forward.
Yeah, all right. So we're done with that. So my next question is, it's a question I've asked a lot of all the different authors. I've asked all the different authors that support Read for Pixels, and basically it's, do you think it's important for influential authors such as yourself, who are read all over the world, to make a conscious effort to include characters, both male and female, in your stories? That, characters that show readers the importance of respecting women as equals and as human beings? Or do you think it's too preachy?
No, I think it's necessary. I think you can do it where it's too preachy, where you're writing solely from the point of an agenda and not from the point of also telling a story. But I think it's vital to both read and write in a diverse way, and that's not just necessarily about men and women, but it's pretty much about any kind of diversity you're able to and willing to tackle, whether that's the disabled or the elderly or persons of color or transgender or whatever it is you feel that, and that's another thing that has, over the years, I've tried to be more diligent about thinking about it, because what happens is, I used to work for the library. I used to work for the Bucks County Library System here in Pennsylvania, and one of the things, I worked in the marketing department in part, and one of our goals was to create a library that served the quote-unquote underserved. In other words, the blind. How are the blind dealt with in libraries? How are the elderly dealt with in libraries? How are, in a predominantly white area that still has some kind of ethnic component, how do you speak to everybody that's using your library, not just the standard white upper-middle class patrons who are using it now? So how do you not only do it in a practical sense to broaden the reach of the library, but also just to talk to people? And so to me, I like to take that idea and put it into the fiction a little bit. How do I, both from a practical sense, I'm a narcissist, and I would very much like to be read by more readers, and so I would like to speak to more readers and not just speak to people who look like me. And also on the, we're all humans floating around on this little blue-green marble called Earth. I'm trying to actually, talk to them too, and not just in a marketing, I want to make money way, but in the art is a conversation, and I don't think people should be kept away from it just because of who they are or the vagaries of their identity.
Yeah, because we've created Read for Pixels because we recognize the importance of getting the conversation about violence against women, about sexism, about misogyny started in in popular culture, because popular culture is what most people are sort of sitting in right now. It's what people, fandoms chat every day about about their favorite authors. They chat about their favorite characters, their favorite TV shows, and it's one of those. And that's why we asked you that question, because you guys have so much influence. Sometimes what you guys say goes. So anyway, the next thing is we're going to segue right into the next question, which is the recent attacks on Anita Sarkeesian are just one in a long line of aggressive pushbacks by certain male quarters of the geek world. What do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books, more welcoming for women and girls?
It's interesting because I wrote a post today about this, about the whole Gamergate thing and what is ostensibly supposed to be, quote unquote, a movement that calls for ethics in games journalism, but then also is about removing agendas, quote unquote, from games and removing agendas from reviews, and it ultimately, for as much as it claims to be this one theoretically pure idea, if you delve into the hashtags, it looks like a septic, toxic mess of misogyny and racism and terrible stuff. So I likened it to the post to dinosaurs seeing the meteors coming, and it's also appropriate, I think, as a metaphor because the time of the year that it is. September and October are an interesting time around here because yellow jackets, the bees, the wasps, get very aggressive. And the reason that they get very aggressive is because they realize that they're dying and they need food sources before winter. And so they start to kind of freak out. So you're a lot likelier to get stung and find an aggressive nest of yellow jackets at this time because effectively their little personal meteor in the form of the winter is coming. And I think this is very much like that. I think this is people who are very upset, and they're growing increasingly aggressive because they sort of sense the demise of a certain cultural component, a little raft they've been floating on for a very long time. And it's starting to sink, and I think that's starting to freak them out. So I think as creators who want to push back against that, I think you literally do have to push back against it. You have to be an active voice. You can't be quiet. I think you can be empathic and as polite as you can. Not that I'm always polite on my blog, but I still endeavor to have a conversation with people who are willing to have it. I think you need to make the space for people. I think you need to bring them to the table and not exclude them from the conversation. As someone like me who's a blogger, I try to moderate my comment section so that people are welcome there. And I don't mean, because here is where people will say, but you're not welcoming to me because I said horrible thing and you kicked me out of your comment section. By welcoming, I don't mean everybody gets a voice. I mean that everybody gets a voice as long as they're polite and they're nice and they're in the conversation. But I mean, if you're bringing the hate and the awful stuff to the table, moderating those comments is about getting them out of that space, so it's safe. I think comment sections on the internet for a very long time have not necessarily been as safe as we need them to be. It's where you get a lot of the threats, and I don't think men necessarily understand that, because I can write the posts that I write, and I don't get death threats, and I don't get rape threats. I get people who are mad at me, but like that's kind of it. Whereas women will speak up, and Anita, Sarkeesian will be literally forced out of her home to go into hiding effectively. People will get constant, like a barrage, a ceaseless, nasty, poisonous barrage of threats of sexual nature, of a violent nature, and that's not something I have to deal with. But that is something that women have to deal with, and I don't think men necessarily get that because it doesn't really happen to us. So it's vital. I think there was a good quote today from an article, or I guess Anita's in Portland speaking, and basically it's like, if you want to take, the riskiest thing you can do here is to believe that the things women are saying happens to them, both online and in real world. Believe them. Believe that these are real. Don't just dismiss it and mansplain that stuff away. You've got to actually listen, acknowledge, and believe it.
Yeah, mansplaining. Oh man, I hate mansplaining.
Wait, let me explain to you what mansplaining is.
Yeah.
Let me explain mansplaining. That's always a fun one.
Yeah, it's like mansplaining. Basically, it just feels so patronizing. It's like, I don't know, it's like the expression, don't teach your grandmother to suck eggs. And, as a woman, no, seriously, it's like, I have men explaining to me, how to do the stuff that I already do better than they do. Right. And every conversation I've had, Chuck, every conversation I've had with female, women who are activists, advocates, women writers and all, every single woman has had an instance where they were mansplained to.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it could be in a panel at a conference, and there could be 3 women and 1 man in that panel, and the man would mansplain to everybody. It was.
Yeah, that's a panel, definitely a panel thing.
Yeah. And so it's just, but there are some parts of the geek world, like John Green and Hank Green's communities, the nerd fighters, where they are. For the most part, they're mostly women, and they're girls and women, and they're safe. John and Hank Green just put their foot down about stuff like this, and in our view, the Green brothers are being really, really responsible. When they found out that a YouTuber committed statutory rape and sexual assault, they stamped down on it, and they started taking action about it. And that's what they did. They talked about it very openly, and they now consulted with sexual assault, anti-sexual assault counselors and professionals, and they're doing something about it. Do you think this is? Do you think this is? And we don't know if it's going to work yet, because they've just started doing it late last year. So, do you think this sort of approach that they are taking would work for gamers, or would different parts of the geek world need different sorts of approaches?
I don't. I mean, I can't speak to a lot of the different pop culture sources, but it seems to me that being active, as they are, is helpful. Being diligent and possessing empathy, but at the same time stamping down on those toxic elements very clearly and forcefully. And what ultimately happens is there's pushback that say that, oh, well, the PC elements and the social justice warriors are trying to shut down conversation. That's not really what's happening. They're trying to shut down threat and violence and terror, and they're trying to make places safe. And it's a very different thing, and it's the same idea that, sometimes when you meet intolerant people, they say, well, you're not tolerant of me. You're intolerant. You're the one who's intolerant because you don't tolerate my intolerance, which is, I think, goofy. Very goofy. So I don't have to tolerate intolerance, nor should anybody. And I think it takes an active set of participants to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Okay. That's an interesting question from David Berkner. Hold on. And it's related to what we're saying. It's, could you talk about Atlanta Burns in relation to these topics, since she's a character who is faced with all kinds of bigotry and fights against it in an awesome way?
Yeah, Atlanta Burns is my the acknowledgments for that book is just that the book is for the bullied. Atlanta Burns is sort of I don't want to necessarily call her a hero. She's more of an anti-hero in young adult sense. She's sort of a Veronica Mars, Nancy Drew on Adderall kind of figure. But I think she does sort of take up the cause for the disabused and the downtrodden and the quote-unquote underdogs. And frequently that takes the form of like she's a gay friend, or she's a little Venezuelan friend. It's like these are people who are, in the middle of what we call Pennsylvania, which is traditionally a very white and sort of curious area of the state. And it's about her sort of taking up the mantle for that, because she is herself sort of that way. So for all of the freaks and the bullied and all that good stuff.
All right, so that's done. So we were talking about your blog and what you write about violence against women and sexism and misogyny, and you have written some pretty strongly worded posts about men's rights activists.
Oh yeah.
And their attacks on feminists and women's and women and women's rights activists. Do you consider?
Scamps. Yeah. Men's rights scamps.
So I'm going to put you in the hot seat now, Chuck, and say, do you consider yourself a feminist, and why do you think good men like yourself have been reluctant to speak up against violence against women and other gender injustices?
I do consider myself a feminist, and it was not. I was for a long time afraid. I even did a post about this at one point. I was a little afraid to call myself a feminist because I didn't think it was a very good one. I didn't know that I deserved the title, so I kind of was like, well, I support feminism, but I don't know that I'm a feminist. And then a lot of feminists helpfully stepped up and like, well, there's not like we get together and we have like a meeting. We don't all have like agreement. We vote and bring you into the club. She's like, if you support women's rights and you support feminism, you're a feminist. And we don't all necessarily agree on the exact same agendas, and we don't all necessarily get in the same car and go to work together in the morning, but we all sort of move together, in an idea. So then I sort of felt more comfortable calling myself that. And I think maybe, and I've met other men who maybe feel a little more timid about that because they don't necessarily feel that they understand it well enough to get involved, which to me, the goal then is to try to understand it and to talk about it and have the conversation and try to get on board with what's going on. And again, that's, like one of the two things that I really want to teach my son are, empathy and logic. The two things together will serve you very well. And empathy, in particular, in this case, is very important. Trying to understand what other people are going through.
Yeah, I mean, what would you say to now? There's some sort of trend whereby some sort of trend. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, so I think I was on paper blocking that. So there's a trend now whereby young people, young women especially, they are down on feminists. They say they don't want to call themselves feminists. They think feminist is a bad word. So and the irony is they are enjoying the rights that feminism has fought for so many decades. And what would you say to young people, not just young women, but young men as well who are down on feminists? What would you say to them about their attitude and feminism?
Gosh, I don't know how I would even. I don't think I should be allowed to talk to them, because I think at that point I would probably feel like I'm mansplaining. Let me tell you about feminism, little girl. Like, I think that's probably not a good idea. I would think I would just, again, point them toward empathy. Try to understand what other people are going through, and just do some history. Study your history. And as you say, this has been a road built for you by people who have been feminists in support of that cause. So due diligence and try to learn more about that and talk, engage, converse.
Yeah. Okay. So, in your opinion, how can authors like yourself best support efforts to kick off social change to end violence against women? I mean, Joe Hill talked about telling the right stories.
Yes.
And Robert J. Sawyer said much along the same lines, and so did Delilah as Dawson. Everyone we talk to, they say it's about telling the right stories and the power of stories. What do you say?
For lack of generality, I totally agree. It is about telling the right stories, and it's for me, a story is nothing without characters, and for me, it's about creating those complex, interesting characters who are not held back just because they're women. I think it's about creating diversity in your fiction, and it's about trying to tell those complex and interesting stories. I think by doing that, and by not just, here's the thing, it's like you don't want to just keep doing the same thing. You don't want to keep speaking to you. You don't want to keep talking to the same, because that's, over time you start to realize that that's kind of boring. I don't want to just talk to me. The world is a lot more interesting than me. And so it's vital to sort of engage and create these vital, alive stories with great characters.
Okay, so I have a final question before we go into the whole stack of questions that are piling up. All right, so my final question is, you have been so incredibly supportive of the Read for Pixels campaign and our the Pixel Project's anti-violence against women work as a whole. And why do you, as a man, an author, and a dad, support the cause to end violence against women? Why do you support us? I mean, there's so many other anti-violence against women nonprofits out there. There are so many other ways to tackle this issue. Why do you support this?
Well, first of all, just because it seems like the right thing to do. I think the cause is noble, and obviously this is tied into things not just that I believe in women's rights, but also women's rights ties into fiction and reading and writing, and so that's sort of speaks to me somewhat more completely, in terms of getting me involved. I think it's a place where, obviously, it's my role as a writer and blogger and general jerk on the internet. I figure, well, maybe I can lend my voice to this conversation in a more meaningful way.
Okay, so let's go into the questions. So we have one that's upvoted by 3 people.
Oh my!
They get to vote. They get to upvote their questions. People get to vote.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It's like American Idol for questions.
Yes, it is. Actually, I did not think about it like that. Now that I think about it, yay! Right, people, upvote your questions. Upvote them now. So Eric Moore asks, how many drafts do you usually write, and what are your goals for each draft?
I don't have any specific number of drafts, but I always do, obviously, a first draft, and then there's a draft that usually gets done after my agent or an editor look at it. Sometimes that's a two-step process, agent and then editor. And then there's usually a few iterative drafts after that. The Miriam books tend to be basically like two drafts and then done, although the first Blackbirds, the first book, took me like 5 years to write. The first Heartland book took a year to write, and I think I rewrote somewhere between 2/3 of that book, not all in one chunk, but over time, over the course of a year, again and again and again. So it was a lot of rewriting, not just editing. The second book, Blackbirds, which I just read from, didn't have a great deal of editing. So every story is its own beast, and it must be tamed in its own weird way.
Do you go away between drafts? Because like Stephen King said once before that, in his book on, I think it's called On Writing, right? And he goes finish a draft, stick in a drawer, go away for 6 weeks, and then come back. Do you do that?
When I am able to do that, when I'm afforded the luxury of doing that, and I'm not on deadline, yes, because you ultimately have to. The ideal situation is to come at your book and read it like some other jerk wrote it. You want it to feel like it's like some other person's book, so you can then engage with it critically and unemotionally because it's not yours. So it's like you've disentangled yourself from it. I don't always have that luxury, and so there's little tricks you can do to sort of make that happen. You can change the font, or you can print it out instead of reading it on the screen. Anything to sort of separate you from feeling like you're the person who wrote it, because then you can engage with it more critically.
All right. So that's Eric done. Oh, God, I said that. Eric done. Oh. Okay, next one. Upvoted by 4 people now. Tamara Jones. Tamara Jones. Sorry, Tamara. Anyway, how do you manage writing time, marketing time, family time, and Chuck time?
Clones. I grow clones in my cellar. Sort of a homespun kind of a thing. I have tanks that bubble with amniotic fluid, and then I empty it at clone, and he works for me until he perishes. No, it's very tricky, but I do try to very clearly sort of separate those things. Like I get up at generally about 6 o'clock in the morning, and then I tend to write till about 1 o'clock. Then I do various marketing and editing stuff in the afternoon, and then family time is sort of woven in and all around that, and whatever else. Whiskey to whiskey time is usually about now. So.
Whiskey to whiskey time?
Whiskey time, yeah. I'm doing something I never do, which is this week I'm kind of taking a week off. I never take a week off. I'm usually churn and burn every week, but so I'm going to take a good 5 days and not do a lot of writing for those 5 days. Very.
Well, luckily you're on your week off because Taco Terrier was really unwell this week.
She's having some bowel issues. Let's all talk about that. That'll be a good Google Hangout. Talk about my Taco Terrier's diarrhea problems. That'll get everybody really excited.
Oh, sorry. I need to stop laughing.
Hang on. Yeah. How does this thing work? Hang on.
Okay. So that's done. Okay. Next, upvoted question. Upvoted by 3 people. Hang on. Yes, 3 people upvoted this. Where do you start with a new? This is by V.T. Wiggin. And he or she asks, where do you start with a new story? An interesting character? A plot idea?
It's usually character. Not always usually character, because character for me is the doorway in every story. I think the reader is like Yoda on Luke Skywalker's back, sort of always there with the characters. And you don't have a story without a character. The character story is kind of fruitless. And I think what sometimes happens is I used to, when I was younger, I always started with plot, this plot idea, this too cool for school idea, and then I would sort of jackhammer characters into it and be like, well, whatever, they're fine, they'll figure it out, it's just an adventure. And I think that was definitely cart before the horse situation. For me, it's about creating interesting characters with interesting problems, and finding the story that comes out of that, because as I am fond of saying, plot is Soylent Green. It is made of people.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I read that on your blog. I started laughing at that because it's and I said, oh no, I shouldn't be laughing at it. That's cannibalism.
Yeah, well, you can laugh at cannibalism as long as you're not, I guess, doing cannibalism. You're all right.
Yeah. Do you find? I mean, an offshoot of what you just said. Do you find sometimes that the character that you created starts talking to you, and if you start writing in a certain direction, they stop and they kind of look at you in your mind, and they start yelling at you about, no, he wouldn't say that, she wouldn't say that. Did they come to life for you like that?
Generally they don't resist me quite in that way. Miriam, I mean, they have their own voice, and they sort of kind of take off in that way. Miriam was certainly one of those characters who really very early on established a voice for me, that even through all of the iterative terrible first drafts I did, her voice was always her voice. They don't necessarily rebel against, but they kind of sometimes do their own thing.
Okay. Chuck, you have so many questions here. Can you stay for a little longer?
Yeah, I can stay for whatever, sure. Ask away.
Wow, there are so many questions, Chuck. You are so popular.
Finally, all of the people I knew in high school. It's time. My time is now.
Now, okay. Oh, upvoted by 3 again.
3.
This is like American Idol for Google. Google Hangout American Idol. Google Idol. Google Hangout Idol. Yeah. Who is? This is by K Nash. Gnash. That's Nash, right? K Nash. And who is your favorite author? Who takes up the most shelf space in your library?
That is a hard one. I have a few authors that take up a lot of shelf space, that have like territory. They have like literal countries of shelf space. Robin Hobb, who writes amazing, if you want good complex characters, Robin Hobb in fantasy. Robert McCammon, Bill Lansdale, Bradley Denton. I guess there's a pretty Lauren Bucas is starting to get some. She's got 4 good books on my shelf now. So yeah, they're all good. Stephen King, obviously, he's there. I mean, he's got his own nation.
Okay, that's done. Chuck, Delilah asked Dawson, "Hey, Delilah, hi."
You shouldn't let her back in here. Once she's done, get her out. And she's not allowed to ask me questions.
All right, so Delilah asked the question that was upvoted 6 times by 6 people.
Of course it was. Of course it was.
Okay, she says, "Oh, this is hilarious. If both your hands were lost in a horrible, angry Gretel revenge scenario and you couldn't write anymore, what would you do as a new career?" That's upvoted by 7 times now.
Oh, 7 times. What would I do well, I feel like I could put hooks on these stumps, and I could either be a fisherman or I could fight people with my hooks. I would be a hook fighter. I would fight people with hooks, my hook hands. And then I would use my hooks to defy what everyone said, and I would write stories with my hook hands. That's what I would do. Writer gonna write.
Yeah, you can still write now, right? Because they have all these voice recognition programs. These voice recognition programs where you can just talk into the...
Yeah, I'll use my iPhone, and it'll get it all wrong, and I'll self-publish these horrible monstrosities that Siri mistranslated.
Yeah, I think that I think Terry Pratchett used it, right, for a while.
Okay, he probably did, yeah. Probably you didn't use Siri, but yeah, probably.
Yeah, okay. So, Delilah, your question's been answered. Hang on. Google Hangout, I hate you. The question.
Don't tell it that; it will kick us out.
Yeah, people. We were talking about how Google Hangout freaks out sometimes and kicks people out.
It does. It's very
All right. So, next question, uploaded by 2. Come on, Google Hangout. There we go. It's by Hudson Christie, and she asks, "How was writing Hunter the Virgil different than writing fiction or screenplays? And if you're a tabletop RPer, role player, I guess, what's your favorite game?"
Oh man, the way I always describe game writing versus fiction writing is that game writing is for me about you putting the it's like taking the ego out of the equation. You're putting the pieces on the table for people to build their own stories, for players to build their own stories. So they're trying to tell stories with it. Even something D&D, even something as simple as chess is in its own way a story. So you're giving them the Lego blocks to build their own narrative. Whereas fiction is you're taking all of the ego onto yourself. And you're telling your story. You're putting that bold boot print in the dirt, and you're saying this is a story and it's worth telling. It's my story. It's not yours. It's all mine. Whereas the reverse is kind of true with games. My favorite game probably is a White Wolf game. Changeling the Lost is always a game that I will always. It's a great sort of abstractly. It's a game that's very metaphorical for the survivor experience. It's freaks and underdogs and survivors. It is a powerful game, and I have found so much to love in Changeling the Lost.
All right. Next question, upvoted by 3. It's by David Berkner again. Yes.
Wow, David, bringing it.
You know, do you know David? Is David your friend? Oh, yeah.
I don't know David, but the devil knows David. I don't know.
Okay. David says, do you consciously use present tense in most of your books? It works really well, in my opinion, to create immediacy and has me on the edge of my seat when reading. P.S. Did you try to kill your readers with your Paloma recipe? It's crazy strong but delicious.
Well, that's a two-parter. I do write in present tense generally because I do find it immediate. I find it, I don't think there's anything wrong with the past tense, but in terms of the types of books I write, I want it to feel like the story is happening literally as you read it, not a story that's already happened that you're just coming in after the fact. I don't want it to feel like a fairy tale that happened 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. I want it to feel like this is literally happening outside your window right now, so you better pay attention. As for the Paloma recipe, that's actually kind of the Paloma recipe, but it's slightly tweaked for me. But I mean, it's just a boozy drink. Margaritas in general, Palomas, they're good. Negroni, they're all boozy drinks.
Do you find that writing in the present tense is easier than the past tense? Because I do tutor little kids, teach them English, and whenever they try to write in the present tense, because they're still learning tenses, right? It all screws up. But when they write in the past tense, it goes so much more smoothly. So it's like when I write myself, I just find it easier to write in the past tense. So do you find it easier to write in the past or present tense?
It's probably easier right now to write in the present simply because I do it so much, and also it's the way you would write in a screenplay as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easier now. I don't know if it was easier always, but it's easier now. Like one of the first early drafts of Blackbirds, it was past tense and it didn't feel right. So I rewrote it as present. Still didn't finish it at that time, but I started rewriting it as present and it worked.
Okay. Next question is a fun one. Ooh. Really fun. I don't know if I pronounce her name correctly. It's Ksenia Anske.
Oh, I know her too.
Yeah. Okay. And she asks, haha.
I know. I know it's all right.
All right. What pajamas do you sleep in? Do they have face beads on them?
I do not have face beads when I sleep because that would would be very painful. Face beads at sleep. Face beads they sleep somewhere else. No, I do not have face beads or faces on my pajamas. My pajamas are I'm wearing boxers when I sleep. It's fairly about as mundane as hazmat suits. I don't know what I'm supposed to wear when I sleep.
What are face beads?
You know what? Hashtag face beads. You just gotta search out face beads. It's just
okay.
I don't even know where it started. Just hashtag face beads.
All right.
Hashtags on the internet today. That's the
Okay. Next question, upvoted by 3 again. It's by Mediapathic Steen, and he or she asks, do you have any advice for someone who is about to finish a first draft and is looking at the landscape of editors and agents and, oh God, what now?
Well, first of all, finish it. No matter what else. Don't worry about anything else. Just finish it. And then get excited for yourself because you did what so few people ever do, which is finish a book. And then, as we talked about earlier, if you can, bench that book for a while, work on something else, come back to it later when you can pretend like some other jerk wrote it. As for mostly it's just trying to figure out which direction you want to go with it. The agent hunt is stressful, but you got to let it not be that stressful. The biggest advice I give to authors in general is to care less, which sounds like weird advice, that you should not care as strongly as you do, but what often happens is we build up these expectations and this pressure and this whole, the publishing industry and the audience and the book and everything sort of takes on this almost mythic Sisyphean weight, and you can't. You have to let some of that go and sort of be like, I'm writing because I like to write and because it's fun and because this is what I do and this is what I want to do. And then once you've sort of let some of that go, it's easier to approach whether it's an audience through self-publishing or an agent with publishing or whatever it is. It's easier to sort of do that when you care just a little bit less. Not don't care at all, just care a little less.
Yeah, and don't do what that dude in the YouTube video did, right? That you posted.
Don't do the elegy of womanhood with his quarry. Don't do that guy. I feel bad for that guy, but ultimately he did that in public, and he should know better. Everybody should know better.
That was, the reaction that I had to that, and which one of the commenters said was, "Oh, honey, no."
Yeah, yeah. My response was just like, "What? What?"
Yeah. All right, everybody. There are more questions there, but if you have more questions to ask, you better ask them now because Chuck's going to stay on a little later than the hour. And so, we have probably another 10 or 15 minutes. If you want to ask your questions, just pile them in now. Pile them in, and Chuck will do his best to answer everything.
Do my best, my darndest. That's the strong language I'm bringing. People always ask me to curse. Well, there it is. My darndest.
Yeah,
That's Groot, everybody.
Oh my God, that's Groot! I totally love Groot.
A little glowing hand right there. Yeah.
Baby Groot is so cute.
Yeah.
Especially the part where he was dancing. He was dancing at the end.
See, everybody loves the dancing Groot.
All right. Next one, upvoted again by 3. People are just voting and voting. It's by Eric Moore again, and he says, "You have such a strong voice when you are posting things on your blog. Do you try to tone that voice down, or use a different voice when you are writing a novel?"
Well, I try to maintain a strong voice. I don't necessarily want it to be my strong blog voice. My strong blog voice is like, you gave a hobo like a hammer and a bottle of whiskey. Like, that's sort of my blogging voice. I don't necessarily want that to translate to fiction. I think fiction is better when it's more restrained than in blogging. Not always. Sometimes the fiction goes off, but I try to maintain a stronger rhythm and a stronger poetry to the words that I use in fiction than as to what I do with my, whiskey-soaked venom rag that I call my blog.
Oh, they're piling in now. Ooh. Okay, so that's done.
I will eat them all.
Yeah, Oh, cannibalism online.
Oh, there it is. You knew it was going to get there eventually.
Okay, Google Hangout, I hate you again because you keep telling me there's an error.
No.
Oh, okay, we shouldn't say that because they might kick both of us out. Okay, here's a question from Allison M. Dixon. And she says, oh, this is really interesting. Do you like to incorporate Easter eggs into your work? What are some examples?
I do put Easter eggs in my work, and I feel like if I name the examples, then they're not very good Easter eggs. But I will say that a lot of my books have little ties into each other, little glimpses of characters, little references to each other, as if they sort of exist in some weird shared interstitial terrain.
Okay. Oof. Next, upvoted by 3, it's by Hudson Christie. She says, did The Handmaid's Tale influence Heartland?
I wouldn't say like in a direct, I'm homaging it way, but I mean that's part of my intellectual background. So, and I love the book. So I mean, yeah, I mean in that way, yes, yeah. Okay. The Handmaid's, that's a much better book. Let's just be very clear about that right now.
All right. Next, David Berkner is back, and he's a big Atlanta Burns fan, I think.
He's drunk on Palomas right now. That's what's happening.
And he says, can you reveal anything about the next Atlanta Burns book? Also, how long have you had your glorious beard for?
Oh, another 2-parter from David. 2 completely separate questions, but I can answer both of those. The next Atlanta Burns book comes out in February of this coming year, February 2015. It is called simply Atlanta Burns. It combines the original novella Shotgun Gravy and the original novel Bait Dog into one tome. They're kind of re-edited and they sort of work together. They're incorporated together, so that it's a revision of those things. The author's official text, if you will. And then the second book, which is tentatively titled Frack You, comes out in February or January. Actually, and I said February. It's actually January now. It just moved to January. January of next year. And it sort of concerns, oddly enough, natural gas fracking, and sort of Atlanta having to deal with her old friend B. Oh, and beard. I'm supposed to answer the beard question, because if I don't answer the beard question, who will I be? My wife and I went to Hawaii some years ago for the first time. We went to the Big Island, and I decided I was going to grow a crazy island beard, a la Kids in the Hall. There's this Kids in the Hall sketch where a beard comes alive, in the island beard. And so I thought I'm going to grow that. And actually, because I used to have just this thing, the Van Dyke, they call that. And I liked the beard. It had its own intelligence and sentience, and it spoke to me with its little hive mind cilia, and so I can't get rid of it, or it will betray me.
I've always been curious about beards, because how do you eat without messing up your beard?
Well, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's like a strainer and a food catcher. Like, it's like you ever see on the front of like old locomotives, there's the cattle catcher? Well, this is my cattle catcher. It catches all the cows, and then I can eat them later.
Do you actually shampoo your beard, Chuck?
I do actually, yes, because if you don't shampoo your beard, that will get very gross very quickly. You need to wash that thing.
I was just wondering. I've always been curious about beards because they're so in vogue now with men.
And when they go out of vogue, I will still keep mine, because my beard is not about fashion.
Okay. Okay, so 2 more questions left. Perfect.
Ooh, all right, we can do this.
They're both from Hudson Christie, and she says, question number 1, if you could guest star on any TV show, future, past, or present, which one would you choose?
Guest star on any TV show? I don't know why, but I was thinking about that. I would do a guest turn on Justified. That would be fun.
Justified?
Some heroin-addled hillbilly in the hills of Kentucky. I would do that. That would be good. I could probably rock that look.
Elmore Leonard, his writing is on. My goodness.
Elmore Leonard is a great example. Him and Joe Lansdale are great examples of writers who get out of their own way. They don't put too much between the story and the reader. It's still it's still very much his voice, but he's not in his own way. It's very good.
Okay, the questions are still piling in. Ooh.
Okay, all right.
So let's go with V.T. Wiggin. Your fans, they love asking you questions, Chuck.
Yay.
Okay.
It's actually just one guy. He's just multiple sock puppet accounts, and he's just...
Okay.
It's all Delilah. It's all Delilah.
So... V.T. Wiggin asks, do you listen to podcasts? And if so, which do you recommend?
I don't really anymore, just because I don't have a great deal of time. If I'm going to spend time, I'll try to read instead, because reading is fundamental. Obviously, I do occasionally listen to Night Vale, because Night Vale is weird and fun, but not as narratively compelling as I originally thought it would be. But it's sort of perfectly, it's mood compelling. I settle into Night Vale like it's some other place. I kind of adore what it does to me. So not really into the podcast thing these days.
Would you make podcasts, Chuck?
Would I do them?
Yeah.
If I had time, I would consider it.
All right.
Yeah.
One more question.
Right.
One more, and then we can go trot out that cute little slide we put together. All right, the final question is by Hudson Christie, and she says, do you plan on writing any more books on writing like the Kick-Ass Writer?
I do. I have more of the, the compilations of some of the stuff I've done on the blog with edits and tweaks, but I also have a book that I'm working on called The Terrible Mind's Guide to Giving Good Story. Either that or The Pen Monkey's Guide to Giving Good Story. I don't know what it is. It's very much about the mechanics and architecture of storytelling. less about writing specifically and more about story, as I think the harder thing to tackle. It's a slippery beast, so I want to write about it. And it won't be anything it won't be a reproduction of any material. It'll be all original writing stuff.
So how do you? I'm just curious. Linked to that, going from that, I was just curious. How do you get into the teach writers how to write story gig?
How did I get into it?
Yeah, how did you just fall into it, or did you just consciously go, I'm going to share my expertise with everybody into it?
I wasn't about my share my expertise. It was, I started my blog, actually. Terrible Minds is, as of October, will be 14 years old, to my surprise.
14? Oh, my 14. Goodness.
It's not quite as old as the Scalzi whatever, which I think is 16 years old. Happy birthday to that. I originally started the blog, and what I did there was I sort of spoke to as if no one was listening, and I had no metrics at that point, so it's possible no one was listening. Right? It's quite likely no one was listening. So I sort of yelled at myself about myself, and a lot of what I was talking about was writing and how difficult it was, and the struggle of writing and publishing and all that stuff. And so I still sort of approach it that way. I still sort of I blog about the things that are things I'm learning and are things that are interesting to me, and sometimes I'll do sort of reiterative content. I'll tackle a topic again later on with more things that I've learned or thought about in the process. It's ultimately, because we're all sort of narcissists, the blog is all about me. You could all have died in the apocalypse, and I would be like, I will now go to my blog and blog to nobody. Blog to whatever toxic mutants are still reading.
So you just talked, so it all started with talking to yourself.
Yes, and then, people, turns out they read that stuff, to my surprise.
All right. So now we are going to trot out the little hooray, everybody, let's donate thingy.
Donate?
Yes.
Have to donate. That's how this thing works.
The bad news, the good news is, we're still open for donations. The bad news is Chuck's goodies have flew out the door within the first 3 days of the fundraiser opening.
Right, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, so here is, I'm going to do a screen share. Chuck, tell me if you see it. There we go. Do you see it?
There it is. I do. I do. Should I read it? Can I read it?
Yeah, I'll read it. Do you want to read it? It's so basically, Chuck is one of 11 award-winning best-selling authors, collaborating with the Pixel Project on the Read for Pixels campaign, and the Google Hangouts are one part of this campaign, and the Read for Pixels fundraiser is the other part of this campaign, and we're trying to reach a minimum goal of $5,000 on Indiegogo and $5,000 on Rezu by the end of the month. So if you want to get a bunch of really cool geeky goodies, it's everything from Skype chats to your favorite authors to signed rare editions of books. Go to Indiegogo, donate for geeky goodies via Indiegogo at http://is.gd/r4p Indiegogo. If you only have PayPal or you love short stories, there are short stories by Delilah S. Dawson, woo! Kevin Hearn. Yay! Kevin wrote a story about, Kevin wrote a really cool little story, and Guy Gabriel K. You can get those. You donate via Rezu, and you go to is.gd/r4p Rezu, and you can find out more about Read for Pixels, including how the funds are going to be used, because we've broken it down for everybody. How your donations are going to be used. Go to is.gd/Read for Pixels 2014, and is it gone? Yes. And we are gonna, and if you want to know more, hang on, sharing another one. Yeah, if you want to know more about what Read for Pixels is benefiting, you can go to reveal.thepixelproject.net. And what happens is every donation you put in, every dollar you put in it as a donation, it reveals 1 pixel. So we have 4 famous male role models hidden under 1 million pixels for just $1 per pixel. And that together, we're hoping to raise $1 million for the Pixel Project and the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence to help us keep surviving and keep kicking ass with stopping violence against women, and it's a great way to rally your community to take action together to stop violence against women and girls. Even $5 counts. So please give generously. And we're back to Chuck. Chuck, any last sentiments you want to say before we log off?
No, just please check out the Pixel Project and donate, because this kind of thing happens only because people like you are willing to support it. So check it out, and awesome.
All right. So Chuck and us will bid you good night now. And if you have missed the earlier part of this Google Hangout, do not worry. Go to the Pixel Project's YouTube channel after another 30 minutes, and YouTube will have it up, because this is streaming live to YouTube, and YouTube is probably going to be rendering it for about 20 or 30 minutes before it goes up. So on our channel on YouTube. So go there, subscribe. There are lots of cool authors coming out. Next, this coming week, we're going to have Sarah J. Maas, the best-selling New York Times best-selling young adult author. We're going to have Alison Noel, also the New York Times best-selling young adult author. And we're going to have Jasper Ford. Jasper Ford's going to be in the house. Chuck, are you coming to that one, Jasper Ford?
I would like to. We'll see if the toddler lets me.
Yeah. So, yeah, that would be on Sunday morning your time, Chuck. That would be,
all right. All right. Let's see.
What, 10? I think it's 10 a.m. because you're in Eastern Standard Time. That's like 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time Sunday morning. That's 3 p.m. British time Sunday afternoon on the 21st of September. And Jasper will be there to answer everybody's questions. So now we are going to bid you good night, or have a good day wherever you are. If you're where Chuck is, have a great Sunday evening. If you're in Asia or Australia, have a good work day. Thank you so much. Bye. Bye. Bye.